What's up, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's happening with SPY, Tsla, Nvidia, the QQQ, and a couple of other tickers. And break down what's happening with the economic calendar moving forward. Talk about other factors involving the markets, such as CPI, what you should be watching for as time goes on. But just know that I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I say as financial advice whatsoever. And also, if you guys can, please check out my Moomoo link. If you deposit $100, you're guaranteed 5 free stocks. If you deposit $1,000, you're guaranteed 15 in total, not to mention an 8.1% APY on uninvested cash. The offer ends very soon in just a couple of weeks. Anyways, now let's talk about what's happening with the market. So looking at SPY, we have this nice double top leg structure that has developed, and there's been a bit of a downtrend for the last couple of days. Now, SPY has dumped very close to our 4-hour 20 EMA. After getting a backtest of our 20 EMA in the morning right here. So I think that this is looking very, very interesting. I'm sorry, this is the 50 EMA at 602 that we ended up testing. But the question remains, will SPY dump more? Are we about to see a bigger rug pull? Or is the market about to see a big bounce for an end of the year squeeze? This is going to depend on different factors, of course. So I'll break down what those factors are and what you should be watching for. So the first thing worth mentioning is the fact that the market was more red than green. We saw Nvidia in the red, Microsoft was kind of flat, and the majority of stocks were in the red. However, there were some greens out there, such as Google, Meta, and Tesla. For the most part, the market was red with some exceptions. For tomorrow, it's going to be another very important day. Tomorrow is Wednesday, December 11th, 2024. Know that at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 1 hour before the market opens, we have the CPI data report coming out. That's the only major piece of data that will be coming. We're expecting core CPI to be around 0.3%, the same as before. We're expecting core CPI year over year to be 3.3%, which is also the same as before. And we're expecting a tiny little increase in month over month inflation for all items at 0.3%, which is very similar to before. And then also all items CPI, we're expecting 2.7%, a slight increase compared to before. So for the most part, the data should be the same as before. That's what the market's expecting. If it's at least 0.2% higher than what we're expecting, we're going to be a little bit more bearish. And if on average it's like a little bit below that, if it's below 0.1% from what we're expecting, or even below that, I think that that's going to be a little bit more bullish. Looking at the trend on CPI, the last time it came out, we saw that all items without food and energy were basically flat in terms of the data. However, when it comes to all items for CPI, that's just going to be like the whole CPI number. This did increase a bit for the month of October. So we'll have to see if that trend continues or not for the month of November. So I'll be watching that very closely. Now, just know that CPI does tend to be dictated by what we end up seeing in this data. And thus far, we are seeing some interesting trends for crude. So crude, it tends to have a high correlation with CPI. And one thing that's worth mentioning is that when you go back to like September of 2024, crude was at 69.47, at least crude oil futures, and then CPI was at 2.4, right? What happened in the month of October was crude went up to about 71, and CPI went up to about 2.58. So there's a slight increase in crude prices, as we ended up seeing the same thing happen to CPI, a slight increase in all items. However, when you go to November, the data did show a slight decrease in November. So that makes me suspect that because gas prices and oil prices went down a little bit for the month of December, this could be a little bit more positive for CPI, and we could be looking for a slight decrease. That makes me suspect that for tomorrow, core should be very similar to before. I wouldn't be surprised if it's like 0.1% off, basically. But for all items CPI, this should be either the same, maybe even a little bit lower, depending on how it looks. So far, it's looking pretty good, and that's looking quite promising, in my opinion, to get something like that. Now, for other factors out there, we have GameStop announcing their earnings after market close. Their earnings were mixed overall, but for tomorrow, we have Macy's, not to mention Adobe and Costco. GameStop saw their sales drop about 20%. However, despite that, just know that their earnings were so-so. EPS was at 6 cents, which was a little bit better than the expectation of a loss of 3 cents per share. But revenue was at about $860 million. So this is what they reported. That is a little bit below expectations, right? We were expecting $888 million instead. Besides that, the sales in the latest quarter were down about 20% from a year ago. Not the best of news, at least from that end. But besides that, the guidance was so-so. So that's all I'm really seeing, at least for GameStop. There's potential upside that could be coming because of the fact that their EPS was decent. But I think that even though the share price is up just a little bit, earnings were not that strong. They were just like so. That's why it could go either way. Maybe there could be a slight continuation, but that's pretty much it. Now, for the fear and greed index, right now it's quite neutral, stuck in the middle. Will we become a lot more fearful or greedy tomorrow? We'll have to watch for that. Greed is still making up momentum. We'll have to see if we bounce or not from here. The puts and call option ratio is at extreme greed. We'll have to see if this shifts or not. That's making up the majority of sentiment. And volatility remains neutral. So we're stuck in the middle in terms of our volatility. We'll see if we get some kind of bounce or a rejection on the VIX. So we're waiting for a very, very big move. Anyways, let's talk about the market. What do I think is going to pan out from this point on? If SPY is bullish after CPI comes out, I think we go back up at least to the 605 area to retest our 20 EMA. And if we break that, 607 will likely be our next target. If we're bearish after CPI, if we get a not so good report and we get a negative reaction, watch 602. If that fails us, 600 and then 598 are going to be our targets looking at the previous levels. There's going to be a risk of more downside if that ends up being the case. Now, given the data and the fact that crude did end up seeing a slight decrease, gas prices went down a little bit, and the fact that the data is looking a little bit more decent, the odds do favor that the market might try to rebound. I can't promise that, but that's what I think. That's the direction I'm leaning in. We'll see. I'm not personally a fortune teller, so I don't know for sure. I'm hoping that we get some kind of rebound for that 605 plus area. For ES, the share price is looking a little bit more bearish as we're rejecting. We're at this support right here around this 60-40 area, so it's very nice that we tested this. The setup does typically favor downside a little bit more. However, it depends on CPI. So if we end up losing 60-40, we're going back down to 60-20, where these wicks happen to be. If we rebound, we're looking for an attempt to break past 60-62, then 60-71. I presume we might dip a bit here, but then we'll have to see what happens when CPI comes out. Will we be looking for a big bounce back above 60-70, or will we see the opposite? We'll just have to wait and see. But there is potential in this, depending on how things end up going. For Nvidia, there is a slight, interesting looking trend here, right? We love to get bought back up around the 132 to 135 area, and we like to reject off 148. It's been stuck in this range pretty much for the last couple of months. So Nvidia is bearish. We did lose our 20 EMA and 200 EMA as well, but we'll have to see if we get a bounce near this 132 area. I think that it's possible we dip closer to it before we see some kind of bounce. There might be a little dip in the morning right before CPI comes out, and we'll see if we get a bounce. If CPI is decently bounced from here, we're looking for an initial dip, then a bounce back up to about 137. If we lose 135, we're looking for 132, so it could go either way, but I'm hoping we get that rebound for 137. We'll see which way we end up going, as anything is possible, but I am leaning in the direction that this will get a bounce soon as we're approaching this key support between 132 and 134. So look for a dip and a bounce is the most likely case, but once again, it all depends on CPI. If we get the bounce, look for a break of 137 and then eventually 140. If we don't get the bounce and we lose 132, then 130 is coming, but that's a little bit less likely because every time we've been hitting 132 for the last few months, we're just bouncing off of it. So the odds do favor this kind of dipping and bouncing. We'll see what happens depending on CPI nonetheless. Bitcoin might attempt to get back up to about 98,000. I think it's doing a good job at holding up, but whether or not we get that bounce depends on CPI. A decent CPI could launch Bitcoin back up towards closer to the 100,000 mark. And if CPI is hot, we could be looking for 94,000 to be retested. If that breaks, we're looking for 91,950. So look for an attempt to get back up to 98,000. We'll have to see how things end up going. For other factors out there, we also happen to have Tesla. Tesla's on a very, very nice uptrend right now. We're looking at 400 as our main support. If we lose 400, we're looking for essentially 393, not to mention 382. As long as we're above 400, we're looking for an attempt to get back up to all-time highs. Tesla's previous all-time highs are around 414. We could be testing that. So will we break to all-time highs if CPI is decent for 414? Or do we get a rug pull, end up losing 400 to dip back down to 397? So with that being said, I think that there's a very, very good chance that Tesla is bullish. It looks very, very strong as it's trying to hold above 400. So I think the odds will still favor the upside. So for now, that's looking as one of the most likely possibilities. We'll have to see just to be safe. So just keep that in mind, at least as time goes on. For other factors out there, we also happen to have NQ and the QQQ. Now, NQ does look a little bit more bearish to me because of the fact that we have a head and shoulders like structure, and we're looking for 21,356 as the main support. We did touch very close to that today, only to rebound off of it. So that's going to be very, very important. However, just let it be known that as we start dipping, there's going to be some key levels to watch for, and it all depends on the report. So if we are bearish, okay, we want to see this thing lose 21,356. If that fails, it's going to be dipping much lower, all the way down towards 21,250. If we bounce from here, you want to get back above 21,487. If that bounces, we're going to be looking for a push back up for the higher levels. My guts is telling me, okay, that we're going to most likely try to rebound because CPI should be decent, but we'll see just to be safe. Might dip a bit, then try to make its way back up as we're trying to hold our 50 EMA. So it might try to reclaim 21,500. So we'll see about that just to be safe, depending on how CPI goes. There's a head and shoulders on the QQQ. This favors downside a little bit more because we have to see if 520 holds. If it doesn't hold, we could be dipping closer to fill this gap all the way back down to this 518 area. So this might dip a bit more before it tries to bounce. We'll have to see about that. Will CPI cause a dip and a bounce? We'll see. But just know that that gap hasn't been filled. And if we lose 520, we're looking for 517 and then 516.28 as our supports. If we bounce and we hold above 520, we're looking for a move back up to 525. So it could go either way, but I do want to call out the head and shoulders, which does tend to be a little bit more bearish. So we'll see how that ends up going. For other factors out there, we have Apple. Apple's holding up nicely. We're looking for 248 and then 250 is our targets. A decent CPI favors 250 and a bad one is going to be looking for 244. So it could go either way. But we favor that we want to get closer to 248 or above. So give this the time it needs. We do look a bit more bullish on Apple, so we'll see about that. But it all depends on CPI from this point on. For other factors, we have Netflix. Netflix came down a bit. We did come down to make a lower high and reject, as I talked about yesterday. If we don't hold above 910, we're going to be dipping back down to about 900 flat. If we hold above that, we could attempt to get back up to 930. So it could go either way depending on the data. So be very, very patient. In my opinion, I think there's a very, very good chance that we attempt to see a little push. We could be trying to hold our 20 EMA and trying to get back up to about that 922 area. So we'll see about that just to be safe. For MSTR, we do look a little bit more bullish. We're looking for a test of 382. If we break that, 400 could be coming again. We're in a range right now, so it could go either way. So it depends on CPI, so we'll give it some time to develop. For Celsius, we're just consolidating around this 30.8 area. If that fails us, we're looking for 29.62. And if this holds, we could be looking for 32 flat. Overall, we're just consolidating, but there is going to be a risk of us dipping lower towards 30 flat if that does not hold. So we have to get back above 30.8. Otherwise, we favor 30. And the odds do favor downside a little bit more, at least technically speaking. Supermicro might be dipping a little bit more, closer to about that 38.75 area. We'll see if we bounce off that or not. We'll see what CPI brings us, but for now, that's what I'm favoring. Palantir got this big red bar, which is leading to a rejection. If CPI is decent, you want to get back above 72.35. And if it's not too good, we're looking for 69.02. So obviously, it could go either way, but looking at the chart and the trend, we do look a little bit more bearish. So the chart does favor downside just somewhat more. So we'll have to see just to be safe, as it could go either way. But the chart is favoring that it might be testing the 69 area before it tries to bounce. So just please keep that in mind, guys. We're looking a little bit weaker, at least on Palantir. For Rivian, we look a little bit weaker. We were trying to break past 15. We said if that broke, we would turn bullish. Otherwise, it favors downside. It might be dipping to 14 if that fails us. We're looking for 13.38, and we'll see if we bounce off that or not. That's where the next EMA is going to be. So I do favor us testing the 20 EMA before it attempts to rebound. So look for some downside on Rivian as the most likely possibility. We'll see what happens with CPI, but that's what the chart is suggesting. SoFi also has a left shoulder, head, and a right shoulder. We were talking about this as well. We have to get back above 15.6 to turn back up. Otherwise, we're favoring a move closer to about 15 flat. So 15 is looking more probable for some more downside. For the IWM Russell 2000, we are on a bit of a downtrend, making lower highs and lower lows. We'll have to see how we react to this. We have 238 as our resistance, then 236 as our support. Might pop a bit. We'll have to see if we can try to get back to the upper trend line around 238. Might be a little push tomorrow morning. We'll see if we reject. Otherwise, we're still in this range. We have to break out of this to turn bullish. Otherwise, we're just completely stuck in this channel. So give it some more time to develop. For AMD, we look a little bit more bearish because this is on a big downtrend. We called this out yesterday. If we don't bounce here, we're looking for essentially 125 as our target. If CPI causes the bounce, though, we could try to get back above 130. So it could go either way, but we look a little bit more bearish for a 127.5 to 125 target. So we'll see how it goes. For ARM, we had a high here, came down with a lower high, and we're rejecting. We have to get back above 138. Otherwise, we're favoring downside back up down to about the 135 area. So I think that with these rejections, we're favoring a move to 135. We'll see if we bounce or not, but just keep that in mind. For coin, we have a double top leg structure. We're kind of rejecting here. This does favor downside a little bit more for 294 before it tries to bounce. We haven't made the full measured move yet, so we'll see. If CPI is decent and causes a bounce, it could just go straight up above 312, but this is favoring downside a little bit more before it tries to rebound. Amazon is obviously favoring downside a bit, but it depends on 225. If we don't hold 225, we're going to be jumping to 222. If we hold 225, we could rebound for essentially 227. Could go either way, but we're favoring 225 or below. For Microsoft, we have a head and shoulders like structure. We'll have to see if this holds. If we lose 612, we're looking for essentially 600. And if this holds, we could attempt to rebound. Could go either way, but I do anticipate a retest of 612 before it tries to bounce. For Microsoft, we're looking for essentially 441. If that holds, we rebound. If not, we're going to be dumping back down for about 438. So it could go either way, but I favor downside for 441 as a stronger possibility. Google looks a lot more bullish, looking for 188s than 190s are targets. I think it's doing a great job so far, so we'll see how it goes. GameStop got this like pump that happened. Now it's just kind of flat because earnings were so. Their EPS was a beat, but their revenue was a miss, and they did see their sales drop. Guidance wasn't really strong enough to cause us to bounce, so I think it's just going to consolidate around 28, not really doing much. AMC is following the trend very flat right now around 4.4. DJT looks like it's going to be dipping to about 33.2, so just keep that in mind, guys. There's a risk of this dipping a little bit lower. For the VIX, we have been trying to rebound, but just look at this, guys. We are in a very interesting place where we haven't necessarily lost our key support. We also haven't broken resistance. So we're stuck right now on the VIX. Now, if we reject off 14.23, we're looking for 13.8 as our support. If it loses this after CPI comes out, we might fill this gap, and that could signify some upside for the markets. If we break this, we could be looking for a pushback up to 15. So it could go either way depending on how CPI goes. So be very patient, guys. We'll see if the market gets a big bounce or not. If the VIX breaks 14.23, we'll see if that ends up being the case. So be very patient. For the 10-year, we have these gaps to fill below, so we'll see if this dips or not, depending on the CPI report. And then the dollar is kind of dipping right here, very close to our 50 EMA. So it could go either way, but it's looking a little bit weaker, which does tend to suggest upside could be coming. So as you guys know, I am not some kind of fortune teller. I don't know what the stock market is going to do tomorrow for sure. It depends on CPI and factors like that. I do want to note that there's a good chance CPI is going to be decent, which could help the market bounce. There are some stocks like the QQQ that look weaker. Other stocks are also following that trend like Coinbase, but then others like Tesla look stronger and SPY is still holding its key support. So it could go either way. That's why you watch your levels. If we lose 602 on SPY, we're looking for 600 and 598. If we bounce, we're looking for 604 and 606. I'm hoping we get a balance because CPI should be decent looking at the data and what Crude is suggesting. But just to be safe, we always have to look at our data just to see how things end up looking. So with that being said, I thank you all so much for listening. I hope you guys have an absolutely fantastic rest of your days. I will be back tomorrow before market open to report how CPI is looking. Until then, I just hope for the best for everyone. I just want everyone to do really well with their trades and such. And please take care, guys. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Thank you and peace out.